Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shankari Goldstein, host of the Inspiring Mind series for the Mind and Life Institute. I'm so glad that you could join us all this afternoon as we talk about healing intergenerational trauma. For those of you who are new to Mind and Life, we believe that many of today's problems, from growing mental health concerns to social and racial injustice to the climate crisis, originate in the human mind. Building on our 35-year legacy, we explore the potential of the mind to solve such problems. Each episode of Inspiring Minds explores solutions to real-world issues through the lens of research and contemplative wisdom. Throughout this season, we focused on the theme of healing, from the use of mindfulness and yoga for addiction to contemplative approaches to calming the anxiety that many people feel in the face of the climate crisis. Today, we'll look at the unresolved trauma and the belief systems that are handed down through generations, along with the strategies for healing the harmful legacies of the past. In particular, our guests will speak to the role of art and storytelling and the deep wisdom that's found in the African philosophy of Ubuntu. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank Mind and Life supporters for their generosity, as well as all of you who contributed during the registration process for this program. Your generosity is deeply appreciated. We're going to open up our episode with a contemplative art sharing from author, poet, and educator Hawah Kasat. Hawah, if you'd like, you can turn on your video now and join us. Hawah is a community organizer and a yogi, and in the year 2000, he co-founded One Common Unity, a nonprofit that inspires a culture of nonviolence through music, arts, and education. Hawah has authored 4 books and produced 3 documentary films and 2 musical CDs. He's the editor of the Poetry of Yoga book anthology, one of my favorite books to read, and producer of the award-winning Fly By Light documentary film. In 2019, Hawah received Georgetown University's Legacy of a Dream Award, honoring an inspirational emerging leader whose work embodies the values and spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King. We hope you enjoy this balancing experience. Joining us from Lake Atitlan, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hawah, Guatemala, please welcome Hawah Kasat.
Thank you, Shankari, for having me, and it's an honor to be here and with all of you today around the globe. We will begin today with a land acknowledgement. I invite all of you to sit comfortably where you are. I invite you to close your eyes briefly, if that's comfortable, or I invite you to go ahead and just bring your gaze down towards the ground. We'll move from the land acknowledgement directly into a meditation, and from the meditation directly into a spoken word poem that I'll be reading for all of you. Thank you all, seen and unseen, for coming today. We give thanks for the land upon which we sit and stand, gratitude for our health and safe journeys. Virtually from across states, nations, and oceans, we have descended here together at this one place to possess our hopes, wishes, and dreams for healing from intergenerational trauma and building a just and compassionate world. We borrow this land from Mother Earth, known lovingly here in Latin and Central America as Pachamama. And we steward this land for our great-grandchildren. In so doing, we understand our responsibility to cultivate vibrant and sustainable ecosystems. These ecosystems are both internal and external, and manifested through the quality of our thoughts, words, and deeds. We give thanks for the shoulders of our ancestors upon whom we lean, stand, and foresee ancient wisdom and knowledge. We ask our ancestors to join us here today. We ask our ancestors to energize and activate this space so that we may all experience and unite around laughter, compassion, joy, and love. Together, we take a moment to recognize and honor the indigenous tribes and native people who were the stewards of this land, the original inhabitants of this land we are currently residing on, And for all of you spread across the world, take a moment to think of who may have been here before you. For me, at this moment, I am in Guatemala, located on Lake Atelan. Here in Guatemala, there are more than 20 Mayan ethnic groups. And the Lake Atelan area is home to a handful of them. Most notably, I give honor and my reverence to the Tezutchil and the Kakitchil people. Here I pay homage to the many Mayan ethnic groups as I'm acutely aware and presently witnessing you being pushed off and bought out of the most bountiful, beautiful, and sacred places in your long traditions and history. I recognize you are living and breathing people who are suffering real life displacement from the consequences of the massive migration of Westerners onto your sacred lands. I honor and I commit to supporting and bringing awareness to your enduring spirit and legacy. We also take a moment of silence for all who are struggling to find clean water, electricity, shoes for their feet, immigrants, refugees, political prisoners, the religiously persecuted, environmentally displaced, marginalized, those lives lost to COVID and the pandemic and the oppressed peoples all across the world. We take a moment in this land acknowledgement of silence to stand in solidarity. Ashe, Aho, Amen, Ahankatu. Wherever you are, I invite you to sit tall and find a long spine, maybe find your feet. Feel your breath beginning to get deeper and longer. I invite you to draw the breath in through the nostrils and draw it down into the belly. Feel the belly and the navel expanding as you inhale. And as you exhale, I invite you to relax your shoulders, release any stress or strain in your body. As you inhale, create more, longer space. And as you exhale, continuing to soften and continuing to surrender into this moment. There'll be so many words for us to absorb over the coming panel discussion and dialogue. I invite us to drop into silence for this meditation. We'll drop into just a couple of minutes of mindful silence. Please become still in the body if that's comfortable and become really aware of all the sounds you hear. The sounds inside the room, the sounds outside of the room, any sounds that are being born out of the stillness. Taking a few final breaths. Invitation to keep your eyes closed as I move into the spoken word poetry. Invitation to remain here still. An invitation to open your eyes. That's comfortable for you. My anger does not mean I am not spiritually evolved. Me being angry might mean that I've been wronged. My anger does not always mean that I need to relax and take a deep breath. I shouldn't need to push my anger away or try to suppress it. If I'm scared or frightened, that does not mean I'm not strong and confident. My journey begins with acknowledging and accepting the trauma that has caused my fear. If feelings of anger, shame, confusion, sadness, depression, resentment tend to haunt us, whether once a month or once a day, remember that sometimes our individual emotions are tied to the overall confusion that is the state of our planet. Our ups and downs, our sorrows and pains are tied to the rainforest and the polar bears. The vacillating state of our consciousness may also be tied to the hundreds of millions of people living in poverty and the continued long-term impacts of systemic racism and colonization. There is nothing wrong with anger, but there may be something wrong with the situation. This might be how I'm feeling in this moment, but that does not mean this is how I will always feel. This feeling is temporary and fleeting. When I release from thinking this is how it will always be, then I'm open to change. I know that things will change. I have to cultivate patience and allow the time and the space for the shift to occur. Transformation begins when I do not identify my entire being with just one emotion or even just one perspective. My suffering and pain are correlated to the degree to which I've liberated my mind from the concept of permanence. Opportunity is me seeing the possibility and the inevitability of change. When I've liberated my mind from thinking this is how it will always be, then I can see opportunity. I can become unstuck. But becoming unstuck does not mean getting over it. Why get over something? Getting over it doesn't signify growing from it. Getting over it means tossing it under the rug. Don't look at it anymore. Forget it. And then when we see someone who looks better, we think they've gotten over it, but really deep inside, they're still hurting. And that's okay. We don't have to move on. We don't have to just get over it. We have to acknowledge and experience and know that it will forever shape who we are and who we continue to be. And so, how do we remain grounded when the ground has been stripped and removed from under our feet? Spirituality does not hide behind no fear. Spirituality does not hide behind no anger. Spirituality does not hide behind no shame. Spirituality does not hide behind no insecurity. In theory, and as something to strive for, these profound spiritual truths sound ideal packaged in a Bob Marley song. When we understand the intent behind his creations, they even make sense, but in day-to-day reality, this is not everyone's actual personal experience. Some hide behind we are all one. Some hide behind peace and love. Some hide behind I don't see color. Some hide behind let's just all get along. There are two truths we are navigating here. One is a spiritual truth that we are all one and connected, that we are one race, the human race. And then the second truth is the reality of being, also known as having to actually live here on earth in this lived experience and truth. Some humans, such as having darker skin color, negative associations, societally conditioned and impressed upon those possessing these phenotypes labeled inferior, we've been enslaved or treated as less than human for thousands and thousands of years. This is not a modern day crisis. This is not a modern day crisis. When we have these situations, we need to sometimes ask, were we truly all born equal? The spiritual truth is we were all born equal, meaning each individual soul has equal worth and value, but the experienced reality for every soul is that we're all being treated a little differently here on earth, and spirituality parading as indifference or spiritual bypassing invalidates the personal experiences some have had. This idea of universal belonging and universal acceptance, claims of spiritual truth are dangerous without context because they may lead us away from the realities that do exist simultaneously. The spiritual bypass in this situation is use your privilege to say something like, things aren't really that bad, or come on, we're all the same. But what's the purpose of all of this spirituality anyway? We have underestimated the need and the time we need to heal. We were so eager to get our strength back that we needed time to process. We also wanted to show up and support our friends. We had good intentions, but unfortunately, what we did caused harm to others. And so all of us are a little cracked and a little broken. To think that someone should just get over the harm that has been done to them, or to ignore that no matter how hard they may work, they may never receive the same rewards as those benefiting from skin color privilege or gender privilege, is not understanding the impact of trauma. Harm is what has been repeated. Harm is not just physical, but psychological. Harm creates trauma, and trauma is then passed down from generation to generation and leads to entrenched cycles of violence, confusion, and pain. This is also known as intergenerational trauma. Ashe.
Open to change. Thank you, Hawah, for that profound, grounding offering. And inviting us to open up to those who have been here before. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the ancestral and unceded land of the Monacan Indian Nation, who have lived here in Central Virginia for over 10,000 years. So we share these messages to bring awareness and honor the presence of all Indigenous peoples and the need for change in colonial settler societies. At Mind and Life, we continue to find ways to cultivate relationships with our global majority and disenfranchised communities, as well as building trust and taking action towards healing and repair. And we encourage you all to share where you're joining us from. I see we've had people joining us from Switzerland and Sweden and New Zealand. So please, in the chat, feel free now to acknowledge the ancestors who are watching over all of us today. And so much of our conversation is turning towards healing and repair and acknowledging much of the trauma that Hawah just spoke about. And I'd love to introduce our speakers that are joining us today. Professor Pumla Gobodo-Madikizela and Aaron Stern, President and founder of the Academy for the Love of Learning. And if both of you would like to join us, turn on your cameras and I'll briefly introduce you. So Aaron and Pumla met on a plane to Dharamsala, India in November 2019, en route to the Mind and Life conversation with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Both say it feels like they have known each other for so much longer, given the experience of connecting through our Mind and Life events. Pumla is a professor and research chair for historical trauma and transformation at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And her work focuses mainly on two strands of research, exploring the intergenerational repercussions of oppression and institutional violence, and examining what she terms reparative humanism, which builds on her earlier work on the relationships between remorse and forgiveness after historical trauma. She loves coastal walks, is a patron of the theater as well as of opera, and listens to jazz at home. I do too. It's great. Aaron is a president and founder of the Academy for Love of Learning. He's a musician, a teacher, a consultant on transformational learning. He founded the Academy to awaken, nurture, and sustain a lifelong love of learning in people of all ages. Now in its 23rd year, the Academy works to awaken the natural love of learning and to help individuals become better at being human beings. Aaron also serves on the board of the Mind and Life Institute, and we thank him for that. Thank you both for taking the time to join us today. I have some questions for each of you, and I also hope that you'll take the opportunity to be in conversation with one another. And we will hopefully have space towards the end of our group conversation for maybe one or two public questions from our audience. And we're asking today that you place your questions that you wish to see in our chat box as they arise throughout our conversation, and I'll be asking them to Pumla, Aaron, and Hawah. So Pumla and Aaron, I'd love to begin with asking you, Pumla first. We recently lost Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I know that he was an inspirational friend of yours, and I was hoping that you could share some reflections, thoughts on the impacts of his legacy, and particularly how he reflected and lived the philosophy of Ubuntu.
Thank you very much, Shankri, and thank you to the audience. I was very moved by Hawah's offering and preparing us for this conversation. So thank you to you, Hawah. I wrote a piece shortly after the Archbishop passed in Cape Town for one of our newspapers, one of our online newspapers. And in it, I described what the world felt like, what just waking up every day, that week of his passing felt like. And there was something surreal about it, you know, to wake up and not, to have him as part of our world and you know, to have his voice as part of our world. His voice had already been silenced because he was not well in his last days. And also because he was so disappointed and so unhappy that the future that he had fought for was not what he had hoped it would be. And so he had fallen into silence, as it were. And so by the time he passed, we were not hearing his voice in the public domain anymore. But I was very privileged because I would drive to their home, his home, and Mrs. Tutu's home in a retirement village about 1.5 hours from Cape Town in Hermanus, where they lived. And I would spend, you know, breakfast or dinners with them. I would drive them out to spend time with them. And he was always the bubbly, you know, Archbishop Tutu. People would come, you know, up to him. This town where they lived in retirement, part of their retirement time is a holiday town. And so people would notice who he is and they would come up to him and they would want to take photographs. He was so generous and so gracious. And what was really so moving about him is that he was the same in public and in private. You know, he was this person who we knew as this person who's full of love and who wants the world to get some of that love and to translate it into solidarity with others. And he behaved like that in every encounter he had. And so after his passing, the memory of him, memory of his legacy would always be about a person who lived the love and lived the solidarity that he wanted to inspire us with. And what is truly inspiring about this is that it was not just, you know, a system of belief, a philosophy of his. It was something that was part of his faith. It was deeply ingrained in his faith, in what he believed in as a Christian. And he modeled for South Africa, which was based on apartheid in the years of his fight against apartheid. He modeled what actually we are called to be when we are Christians. And the contradiction between a policy of apartheid and the values of Christianity that they they wanted us to believe they were inspired by, was always, striking in the way that Archbishop Tutu fought the fight against apartheid. His was a life that was about what it means to be, to embrace the love and solidarity and the loving your neighbor that a person of his faith was living a life of, of this believing in loving your neighbor, in being, in embracing humanity. There was always this difference between his faith and the faith that was practiced by apartheid, a contradiction really in terms. And his fight was very much about bringing us to the center of what does it mean to be a human towards another person? What does it mean to embrace the sense of human solidarity one to another? And so we will always remember him for that. And when that voice was silenced, you could hear the silence, you could feel the silence, and yet the message within that silence just bubbled throughout our country and throughout the world, really.
Thank you, Pumla. It's really incredible to get a deeper connection to him through a friendship, And Aaron, in the spirit of living the love, which was his message, can you share how your work in founding the Academy for Love of Learning is connected to today's theme on healing and repair?
So thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And I think to answer your question, I have in front of me the US Department of Education's mission statement. I think it's important to bring that forward right now. So I'd like you all to hear this. The US Department of Education's mission statement is to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access so that all of us can become very good at competing across the world. For what, we might ask? And what has that to do with love? And what has that to do with repair? So I think to answer your question, the Academy for the Love of Learning is my answer to that. And I was reminded recently by a dear friend, Roshi Retta Lawler in Boulder, Colorado, dear friend and colleague, of a poem by Theodore Rothke. And there's a beautiful line in that poem that says, I learn by going where I have to go. And I'll repeat that. I learn by going where I have to go. So our work at the Academy is really about the reimagining and teasing apart of learning from education. Because education has become basically the way that we continue to have our minds colonized, actually, certainly in this country, the United States. So it's painful. It's alienating from our hearts. It's alienating from love. It's alienating us from the deeper longing to connect with each other, the naturalness of connecting with each other. So in a way, it's a repair process. In my historical roots of Judaism, not the religion, but the spirit of Judaism, there's a word tikkun, which means repair. And it's as if for my entire adult life, I've been on the mission of repair. And probably even earlier, going back to my roots as a child and being in the experience of violence. And my parents were wonderful, in a way, kind of representatives of a culture gone mad. It's the culture we continue to live in now. So I think the Academy was born through that. It was born through a deeper recognition and a longing of my own heart for more sanity, and a recognition that love was actually a far more powerful force than all of the other ones that were around me. And the Academy's work now is through the creation and the practice of many, many different frameworks and pedagogies that have been developed over the past 23 years that now sit at the heart of our work and are part of a research framework that we've created with the Center for Healthy Minds, who many of you who are listening know of Richie Davidson's work. And we intend to strengthen people's connection to these frameworks and pedagogies and really experience the power of learning and the unraveling and the repair that makes possible for the deeper levels of love that live in all of us to activate, manifest in the world, and heal.
Thank you, Aaron. I love so much about what you shared is like the perfect segue into what I hope we're going to be getting in, what we wanted to achieve in inviting you all to join us. And I just want to share that we're going to be promoting some of your programs in our post-event communications because we're so excited about the work that you have coming up too. So thank you for lifting up the offerings that you do in addition to the program itself. And, so much of what you just shared, Aaron, it's like this conversation that we're having today, it's so personal, it's so intimate. And we're asking people to dive really deep into the circle of grief and meet each other. And hopefully by stepping into these stories, like trust can be gained, and I feel like even in this process of, putting this conversation, like so much trust was gained in this experience with you all. And so my question is to you, Pumla, your experience with trauma in the context of apartheid in South Africa, it's so unique, even to many people of color. So how do you feel this experience shaped your approach to the use of heartfelt practices such as compassion and the expression of Ubuntu?
One of the things that we have to remind ourselves of is that when we speak about these traumas that people are exposed to, so often we think that they are in the past, that is something that happened in the past. I think this was very central in Hawah's offering tonight. Sorry, it's afternoon for you. It was very much central in reminding us that these experiences, they may have history, they're historical, the violence from the past, but what makes them so debilitating is that they repeat. That people, when people think about post-apartheid, post-colonial, even post-slavery, they might say, oh, this happened, centuries ago. But what they forget is that these concepts should not be seen as designating an end, that when we pass from apartheid and the new laws and policies, because now it is post-apartheid, this is not necessarily a clear break with the past in the sense of there's a clear demarcation from the era of the violence into the era of human rights. The continuities are always remain as reminders for people who have experienced this past. And what is most sad about this is that you find groups of people who benefited from this past always wanting to move on, to forget the past, not to remember, not to open the wounds. They are the ones who have a history of having benefited from the past and whose descendants continue to reap the rewards of a life of privilege are the ones who say, what's wrong? Just move on. And this failure to recognize how these histories are perpetuated through these experiences of racism, structural violence, the poverty that people inherit and that is passed on to the future generations, that this is something that we have to face and confront as we think about repair, that we are repairing something that in so many ways is really irreparable. That what we are dealing with here is this sense that of the intransigence of this past. And we have to understand that these pasts are passed on both unconsciously and consciously. There is this matrix, this entanglement of both what was unfinished in our forebears, in our ancestors, who are still crying out for recognition, whether it's the recognition of lost land, the recognition of oppression, of being violated, of the indignities that they face, and the fact that they pass on without ever this having been resolved, that then the next generation, the subsequent generations, inherit this kind of unfinished business of this past. So there is that is being inherited from this past, all these memories, in inverted commas, that are carried in the bodies of the descendants of the people who suffered so deeply. There is that unconscious that's carried by the bodies, but there's also the reality of the lived memory. In other words, what is being lived by the descendants, because they're inheriting not just the history and the memories, but they're inheriting the lack, the loss, all the losses, the loss of privilege, the loss of opportunity, the loss of breadwinners who, in our case in South Africa, people were murdered, were tortured and murdered or disappeared, as the language in Hawah's country, the disappearance, they disappeared, those whose bodies were never found. Now, all of these memories are what we carry as communities and societies of people carrying this history. So we carry that burden. It's a burden of the past that is entangled with the burden of the current situation of people who are facing these past. Remember that these experiences are relational. If we live in a society where some people are privileged and others are not, in a society where people are living with the memory of having lost loved ones and lost livelihoods, lost actually a future, because what you are losing is a future. You're losing a future. If your land is taken away from you, you no longer have this land. If you had the land, you would have a sense of identity that knows itself, that I know that I own this. Without that, you're stripped of your sense of identity. And so there is constantly this struggle with this memory, with this life, with the reality of living the life of loss, of living a future of loss, a future that is without. How do you repair that? And so we are constantly confronted with the question of how do you repair the irreparable, and what brings me then to this notion, to this work of Ubuntu, which is about, in spite of that, despite that past, there is always a possibility of reclaiming the sense of who we are. And so the challenge is how do we, in these encounters with the other, how do we carry ourselves, how do you hold the space so that it is a space where we can recognize and experience the other as a fellow human being, like the self, like me. And so we're reaching out to the other with this sense of solidarity, which doesn't mean that you forget the past. In fact, by reaching out in this way, by connecting to the other through this act of recognition, not just by recognizing, I see you, you are there, but embracing the entirety of this person with all their losses, and recognizing your positioning as a person whose forebears had benefited from this violent past. And so how do we journey together with that openness towards embracing these stories, so that through that embrace, we can build this sense of solidarity, this kind of compassionate wisdom about what it means to be human to another person, what it is to care enough to be concerned about the repair of this brokenness.
I want to thank you so much, Pumla, and I want to revisit the lost land comment that you made, because we're getting some people in the comments that are referencing, people losing their land and what that means. But we're also getting some comments, Aaron, from teachers who just gratitude for lifting up that mission statement from, I think you said, the Department of Education. And so, Aaron, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of connecting to our youth in these challenging times. How do we begin to value each young person's unique experience, including that of trauma, and build the resilience, build the readiness in a world that for most young adults feels like it's disintegrating, and and they're being set up for competition just in that mission statement that you shared. So what are your thoughts on that?
I wanted to just acknowledge how moved I am by Pumla and everything you just said, Pumla. And that's why I love you so, and we're such dear friends. I'm inspired so deeply. I think your question is really an important one. In a way, it's kind of our new focus at the Academy. We're taking everything we've learned and trying to bring it into contact with young people. First of all, I think young people are already, in a way, able to bridge divides that my generation was working so hard even to notice. The fact that pronouns are in the conversation, and young people, not everywhere and not all, but are more or less accustomed to the idea that pronouns matter and that there's more than a binary gender, for example. So in a way, finding a way to talk to young people and connect with young people who in a way are already imagining a different future. While everything is falling apart, there are seeds of a different future living in young people. And the way we think about it at the Academy is, how can we share with them our frameworks and our pedagogies and our ways of actually dismantling things that keep us from each other, since they're already moving in that direction. We can help them and support them. I think we're finding a generational strategy. It's possible that by investing our time and energy and focus in those young folks, we might be able to see change, 30 or 40, 50 years from now. As far as now, though, what I know to do best is to experience the impact and keep noticing what's happening and what's unraveling in me as I listen to you, Pumla, or as I listen to you, Hawah, at the very beginning, and not run from it, but actually become vulnerable to it and continue to open. Because I think underneath, at the very basis of all of us, is a deep heart. And we can't walk past trauma. We can't walk past the horrors, the atrocities, all of them, each of them. And we must experience them. As Pumla just said, they live in our bodies. Our bodies, if we can continue to deepen contact with what we're experiencing in our bodies and not flee from it, but grow the capacity to stay present and be in relationship with others. Relationships will help us find our way. You know, nobody has an answer. Being here is what's important, moment by moment by moment.
Thank you, Erin. Relationships feels so relevant to the topic today and how we heal. And it brings me to this place of wanting to illuminate the significance of historical trauma around the loss of land and how these relationships have just been ripped apart, you know, amongst us. And even here, like the land, I like reading that, saying that land acknowledgement, like it means something, but also like the immense guilt that I feel as I speak their name, as I say their name, you know. And at the beginning of the episode, Hawah just shared this powerful land acknowledgement with all of us. And we know that many organizations are struggling to hold public narratives around colonialism, genocide, decades of people being displaced across the globe. So as we continue to gain these new understandings around the psychological impacts of these traumatic experiences, which you both talked about today, we know that the ultimate reconciliation is to give the land back to its rightful people. And that's not really fully resolved. That's, you know, that's not really concrete in every situation. So I just would love to open this space up for you both to share some feelings that you're holding around this particular story in the space of storytelling, as we start to navigate into ways that we can build healing arcs around this topic of intergenerational trauma. And I know that Erin wanted to chat with Pumla about this for some time. So I just want to open this space up for you two.
Thank you, Shankri. Maybe I'll just begin with a bit of a story that I want to share about what's happening in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is where our organization is based. And, you know, it comes back to relationships. We've been in a very deep conversation arising up out of our own deep devotion to learning. So learning is really key to understanding who are we as a group, largely as a group of white people who are on this land and stewarding work that we find to be valuable and have developed relationships in the community. Particularly, I'm pointing to relationships with the Native American leaders and wisdom holders in the community, elders, and just coming and saying, you know, out of all the vulnerability and truthfulness of where we are, how do we meet? How do we connect? Is there interest in meeting and connecting? And for 6 or 7 months, we prepared as a small group of people in our organization to begin to have such a conversation with the Native American community elders and wisdom holders. And we've known each other for many years, but not really known each other. So over the last 18 months, we've been in a series of conversations, deepening conversations. And it's interesting that the easy thing, in a way, is to put land on the table and say, what do we do with this land? But in a way, I've learned it can be a bit of a distraction. Of course, it's very important and it's central, but it's really about the repair of relationships. And I've learned from my friends in that community that it's about what emerges through the relationships will tell us what is right. And what's most important is to be open and vulnerable and available to what is right. So there's no easy solution to this question. So Pumla, I'm curious what you will
Yeah, I mean, just the last thing you say, then there is no easy solution to this question. That's such an important observation. There is no easy solution to this problem. You know, when we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, and now there are truth commissions all over the world, we put in the center the work of reconciliation, that we thought this would be the answer, you know, speaking about an answer, this would be the answer to the problem. Let us reconcile, let us promote, because this is what the Truth Commission was doing. It was promoting reconciliation. And through that process, there are very powerful responses that emerged, new responses that we never knew were possible. For instance, forgiveness that emerged during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was something that, although it was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the actual acts of forgiveness were unimaginable. You know, how people would reach out with forgiveness. Now, a generation after that process, we are confronting the reality that it could not have been easy, could have not have been resolved simply by putting in place a conversation about reconciliation, because in the final analysis of things, the truth of the matter is that people live with the loss. People live with losses. I remember during that time of the Truth Commission, it had just started. I was a member of a congregation in one of the suburbs in the southern suburbs in South Africa. And they decided in the church that they would begin the process of confronting this issue of land, of people's homes, people having been forcibly removed from their homes, which were now occupied mainly by white people. The forced removals in South Africa, which began in the late 1950s, right throughout the 1960s and 1970s, were about entrenching segregation, racial segregation, earmarking prosperous land for white people. And so people were dispossessed of their land, with their homes. And so in this church, it was in an area that used to be a colored area. In South Africa, the racial groups are divided, you know, across, you know, different categories of coloredness, whiteness, blackness, and Indian people as well. And this particular area was an area where colored people were forcibly removed and their homes taken from them and given to white people in whatever way, whether they were sold for, you know, a song or in whatever way. Now this church wanted to confront this history, because the conversation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was about confronting the past. And so the church was doing something noble. Let us talk about this. Let us bring families who owned these homes with families who are now living in these homes. The process went wrong in the midst of it. It went very wrong. Because what happened is that the white people who lived in these homes would talk about how their families came from Europe during Depression and worked hard in South Africa to achieve, you know, a comfortable life, and bought these homes, and how, so this was the conversation about how they made it as white people and white ancestors who came from poverty during Depression and came to work in South Africa. And there were tears, you know, white family people weeping, because now they are confronted with this, with the people who lived in these homes. And what was so painful about it is that, you know, in this exchange of visits, people going to what used to be their homes in their childhood, they would remember the marks across, you know, the floors, the wooden floors, they would remember having played under the bed, and they would say these were, because now the furniture had moved. The skirting board still had the marks that they remember from those early days. And so it was a very moving process that the church had to stop it, because the white families who now own these homes felt this was too much. They felt they were accused. They were made to feel shame, and they couldn't bear it. And so just a few weeks into the process, it was supposed to take the whole period of, it was a pre-Easter period, and which I think in your tradition, it's supposed to be, you know, like a confrontation with one's sorrow and asking for forgiveness, similar in my faith as well. And so it had to be stopped. And so it showed that this is not easy. And what do you do? Here is a home that you got because you're white, and you want the other to believe that you worked hard for it. But what you forget is that no matter how hard the other worked, no amount of hard work would give them the restoration, would give them the future that you now have, because now the inheritance means that your children are inheriting the wealth and this future, and the one from whom it was taken can no longer inherit that. So it's difficult. You know, how do you do? So what is left for us then in the face of this? What is left, as you say, are the relationships. It's not all that is left. There's something else that should happen. It should be a recognition that something needs to shift, something needs to change. And I think that what needs to change is that we need to join hands in fighting for social justice, so that the lives of the descendants of these people from whom something was taken can be different. Under the present circumstances, it's a repetition of disempowerment, the disempowering experiences of racism, of poverty, of loss upon loss that strips people of their sense of dignity. And so what remains, I think, is the power of solidarity, the power of being able to connect to the other and to fight for social justice, because that's what remains.
Aaron, is anything coming up for you in that sharing?
So many things.
Yeah.
Pumla, could you speak about repair and what you discovered in your work that's in your incredible book and grows out of your book? Also play, I should say. But this accountability and responsibility to repairing the fabric of humanity when it's torn. Could you speak about that? It brings such hope to me, and it feels so resonant with what I know in my bones.
I love the word repair. And it's a word that carries so much more power than the word forgiveness. In my earlier work, as you know, Aaron, I speak and write about forgiveness, the power of forgiveness, the importance of forgiveness. But given what we have witnessed, you know, we witnessed in that moment of the Truth Commission, the power of forgiveness. I believe that that power still remains. The power of forgiveness still remains. However, the language is not helping us. The power of the process still remains evocative. It still remains an important guide for us. And what is that guide? The guide is that there remains always the potentiality, the possibility that something will change, the possibility that even with the brokenness, if we open this space, something might emerge. There is this possibility that something might emerge from it. In my work, I speak and I write about the emergence of the unexpected. That emerges as a result of this, of creating this space of openness where we are approaching it from the position of not fear, because we come from a history of fear, a violation of the core of humanity. But what really lies at the heart and at the core of our being is this possibility that we know that we are human in relation to another human being. And that has been silenced because we were taught to separate segregation and racism and giving privileges to one group over another teaches us to hate, to regard one another with suspicion, and it kills that internal voice that actually is the natural voice of love.
The love, exactly.
The natural voice of love. We underestimate these words, and yet, you know, we are born really to love, and it's something that exists in us. And we underestimate its power in our lives because we're not paying attention to it. And we think that transformation is something that is mechanical, you know, that if you change things externally, then you have transformed. Nothing, it doesn't speak to who are we as human beings with this potential to connect with the other through love. Love in the sense of, you know, loving the other person as a presence, as a human presence, being caring enough for them to know that you cannot hurt them. When Archbishop Tutu teaches the message of compassion, the message of solidarity, what is inviting us to do, all of us, he is inviting us to be the conscience of our societies. Because if we are that conscious of our societies, it means we are emulating the kind of life that unfolds when we are concerned about repairing the brokenness. That word means that it's broken. You know, when you repair it, the cracks will always be there. But we wake up every day with this idea that you want to repair, you want to engage, you want to be the change, you want to be in the center of that, building the space, you know, these spaces, these empathic spaces where this possibility will emerge, the possibility of connecting to the other as an act of repair. That is the challenge. And it's a kind of repair that is not necessarily monetary. You know, we may think it does not exclude that possibility, but that's not what I'm concerned with. Money is, that thinking about the monetary kind of repair is very easy. The difficult work is actually caring for one another.
Yes.
Rediscovering, reclaiming the sense of humanity, the sense of being human to another. That is where this emergence of the unexpected plays such a powerful role in this vision, in this reparative vision.
Thank you, Pumla.
I love that. Somebody said there will be times of rupture and repair, and it's really there for all of us to access. And, you know, Eddie, I know you were asking about acknowledging the repair, and I think Pumla just summed it all up, you know, your question there and your comments there. So thank you. And I think this is a really great opening to maybe have Hawah join us as well, if he's able to turn on his camera and join us. Because Hawah, I know that you've been in Guatemala and you acknowledged in your opening that you're witnessing this similar cultural loss happening in real time to the Mayan people. So maybe you can just share a little bit with us, your thoughts around what you've heard and the concept of losing the land, and maybe how these present day harmful experiences impact one's experience of intergenerational trauma, their understanding of their community's historical experience of trauma. Some of your thoughts around this.
Yeah. First of all, Pumla and Aaron, thank you for all you've shared so far. I've been in shivers throughout a lot of this. So much of what you've expressed, Pumla, around the homes in South Africa, it's really been resonating strong with me here as I've been on the lake in Guatemala now for a month, and I've had this really intense experience of witnessing and watching the local Mayan people who have lived here for thousands of years being pushed off of the lakefront and up into the hills by Westerners, expats, those who have inherited the wealth that you speak of and that we should all acknowledge, wealth that has been accumulated and gained through the forced labor of people, and through colonization, still part of that repair that we continue to need to explore. And so coming here to the lake, Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, which is a beautiful, beautiful space, and having the resources and the wealth to start buying and offering to the local ethnic groups and the local Mayans money, which is enough to ooh and awe, enough of enough bells and whistles to have them say yes, and then they get they're giving away their future generational inheritance, as you said, and what could be $20,000 here or $40,000 to buy a home on the lakefront 100 or 200 years from now, that might equate to the $20 or the $80 that was given for a huge tract of land in what is now known as the United States of America for an entire state. When we had and saw Europeans buying entire large land masses with what was then certain amounts of money. I've been struggling deeply with watching it. I am still integrating my feelings around seeing so much displacement in real time. And I just want to acknowledge that the work is so much connected to understanding how structural violence is connected to an economic failure. And that repair, and this came up in my poem, that repair is more than it needs to equate into real tangible things, right? And when I say tangible, I mean access, I mean privilege, I mean inclusion and belonging, and knowing we belong where we are, and having the ability to hold on to our future, and I'm seeing the future being lost, but I'm also seeing the cultural, continued cultural, like the way the Mayans here now, they shape their lives around these, these new inhabitants, these new people that are now living here. So now all their lives are changing to adapt and to basically to serve and be servants, continuing in that role of servitude. And it's hard to watch and witness. And so I appreciate the way it flows into the conversation.
And maybe I can bring up this question from Liz Tetman, and then Pumla, Aaron, you can share what your thoughts are. She says, repair to me insinuates that what existed before broke, And our work is to put those pieces back together to what was before. Can you both speak more on what repair means, what we must consider in terms of intergenerational healing and cultivating culture and tradition without going back to where we were? How do we repair in a forward-thinking way?
I could say something about that from the
Please.
experiences we're having now in Santa Fe. I come back to relationships, because relationships are quite present. They're now these relationships. And I think bridging the divides between us and finding a way to see each other as human beings in the midst of all of the historical trauma that is in the background, which is quite present as we're hearing. Still within that, to find our way to our humanity and to our hearts and our vulnerability, and to build a relationship and to lean into that relationship and to tend to it and care deeply and to learn how to find places of respect and healing. And a recent conversation in preparation for coming to this conversation, I was sharing some of your work, Pumla, with a Native American elder in Santa Fe. And as he listened deeply to what I shared, he said, "Oh, it reminds me of healing a wound, a deep wound." And he was remembering that as the healing emerges through the body, the actual body heals. A scar remains. The scar doesn't disappear. It's not about disappearing anything, but it is about tending to the healing between two people or six people or four people. And solidarity, I really like what you said before, social justice, solidarity. That becomes a way to forge relationship now. And in the course of relationship now, the truthfulness emerges among people to find, well, what are the right gestures? What are the right things to do together?
Yeah, maybe we can transition into what are some of the right things to do together. You know, you're all such artistic people, and as we start to transition into these ways that we create healing and visions for our future, I'd love to ask maybe Hawah, you first, about your youth program, Fly by Light. It's rooted in this deep and immersive rites of passage in nature. So can you share how you've been able to bridge nature, academia, and art as a way to teach peace?
Absolutely. And I so appreciated, Erin, everything you shared early about the work of transforming education. What we've been doing at One Common Unity for 21 years is really moving with that understanding that violence in so many ways is a learned behavior, and that love and compassion and empathy, conflict resolution, healthy relationships, nonviolence is also a culturally learned behavior and something we can teach. One of my mentors in college, Coleman McCarthy, who is the founder of the Center for Teaching Peace, he taught me a lot about how teaching peace is such a fundamental part of the work of repairing and creating the beloved community. At One Common Unity, we've been working really deeply with inner city youth in DC. Currently, we're in 24 schools around the city, middle schools and high schools. And our flagship program, Fly by Light, climaxes with an immersive overnight 5 to 7 night retreat in the mountains of West Virginia or Maryland, where we do deep rites of passage work with young people, putting them in circles to find ways to create art and music that represents their stories. Because having a sense of belonging is connected to knowing that your story is a part of the narrative. And I think a lot of the pain is that so many stories have been lost and have been marginalized and just silenced from the entire narrative. And so what we empower our youth to do is to reflect and to think through deep circle processes and through sweat lodge ceremony and through work with Indigenous elders to think about their journey to the present moment and reflect on through the writing of poetry and spoken word and making music to reflect on what's important for them and what do they value and what is their story and what are their hopes. And through the process of this program, we've had an opportunity to partner with Georgetown University. Georgetown University did a 2-year evaluation study on our work. And it's really amazing. It seems hard sometimes, a lot of to try to quantify the change. But when we think about belonging, we think about, and we see in the data, we see that the young people that are in our program, they're making significant strides in their social emotional aptitude, in their mindfulness, in their healthy relationships. I'm just going to give a few small stats from Georgetown University. One thing that came up earlier was relationship. And what we found was that 10.2% of the youth in our program, they have identified that they have stronger peer relationships by the time they leave our program. And relationship is so important to building that long-term success, right? Having people you can trust and having people you can rely on. That's one of the fundamental pieces to being anchored in knowing and having the confidence to move forwards. We also found through this research study that 17.9% of the youth, they reported that they have a decrease in their sense that they are always failing. That they are always failing. Now think about that for a second, because this feeling of failure is intergenerational within how trauma is repeated, right? Because we are traumatized in ways that are so psychological and emotional, and we inherit that feeling of failure from our parents and our parents' parents. But that feeling of failure is not rooted in reality. That feeling of failure is the inability that's born out of not having the resources to succeed. And then we internalize that as our own personal failure. So what we're finding in our Fly by Light program is our program is inspiring our young people to know that they're not failing, right? And that creates a sense, a trajectory of long-term success. And this is through arts and through music. This is through the power of storytelling and the power of teaching peace. Just a couple of more stats that I think are really beautiful. We found that a 7.6% of our youth have increased in their sense and their ability to empathize. And empathy is such an important part of building receptivity. We found that 71% of the youth have coping skills now that bring them a sense of inner peace. So 71% of the youth in our program are reporting more skills to cope with stress, to cope with anxiety, to cope with their feelings of depression and sadness. And then the last one, which I'll end with, we have so many statistics. I'd be happy to share with anyone that wants them, but let me just do one more quick one since I know we're on time, but 85% report feeling more belonging in their community. So similar to the peer relationships piece, this idea of feeling we belong in our community, I think is really central to how we get better, right? And we hear a lot about inclusiveness now today. We hear a lot, oh yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to move from inclusion to belonging, actually. I feel like inclusion is still keeping me a little bit, I'm being included, but I need to know I belong. And that's a different feeling, right? But our young people are reporting 85% are feeling like they belong as a part of something. and that they have people that care for them. So those are just some of the statistics of our Fly by Light youth program. And, you know, teaching peace should be the goal. It should be the mission of education. And unfortunately, when we think about intergenerational trauma, we are also traumatized by education, which is turning us into numbers and percentage points, and demoralizing us by saying that we're a C, or we're a D, or we're an F, or we're a 62%, or we're a 74%. That is demoralizing and traumatizing to the innate beauty and potentiality that we all possess. And unfortunately, we've boxed intelligence into this little box, and and if you don't have these 2 or 3 types of intelligences, you're a failure. But really, the gifts that we have are all so infinite, and that's what I hope we can come back to. I think that for me is where repair really exists and lies.
You know, that word belonging is so important. When I think of what's happening in our institution, where students, Black students, come to these previously white institutions, and they feel a sense of being forced to assimilate. And they're often talking about how they have to strip away the sense of who they are so that they can assimilate, and how that changes the feeling of being present, fully present, as people with agency. Because now, if they don't belong, if they're made to feel like they're imposters, or they've been done a favor to be at these white institutions, then they feel this sense of not being themselves. And so many students talk about how entering the space, the institution, requires them to strip away the sense of who they are. And when they go back home, how they've got to, one student described this as a resurrecting of the self. Every time I go home, I've got to resurrect who I am, every bit of who I am, in order to feel this sense of deep personhood. So belonging is so important, particularly with these histories, these violent histories.
We have time. Oh, please. No, go ahead, Aaron. I was going to say we have time.
I just want to echo back that what you just said, and also Hawah, what you just said about belonging. And I look forward to a time when the deeper hearts of young people can be expressed through the experiences that they have in learning. Right now, they are more or less co-opted by this system of education that has a very different agenda, unfortunately. So the school outside of school, opportunities that young people can have, where they can experience directly the belonging of their own interests, the belonging of their own movements into light, what brings them alive, what they care about, and that they're supported to manifest those kinds of things in the world, materialize them, bring them alive in communities with each other. And not in the Lord of the Flies kind of way, it's not that, but really having the direct experience of bringing alive what they care about and love, and have the support to do that by the adults who are around them, and trusting that there is another agenda here, the educating of the heart, that young people are ripe for and ready for, and wanting to bring themselves into the world in this way. I think we have to make sure to remember that as they are inside these systems, the systems have a different agenda. And that juxtaposition of the industrialized mindset of education that continues to educate for competition rather than collaboration, distances young people from the bringing forth and belonging of their hearts and what they actually want to do in the world. This is really important to create spaces for that to happen for young people. So Hawah, I like very much what you were describing. And I did some research into your program, which I just think is so wonderful. And the fact that it is through the arts is so wonderful because something else gets to happen when kids are expressing themselves through artistic practices and expression through drawing and music making. And their soul gets to speak and they get to know who they are in a very different kind of context than these classrooms with 24 chairs, with 48-minute intervals and testing at the end. What does that tell them?
And the one piece around here that's a really beautiful, I think, loop to all of that is that music and art has also been the anchor, the pulse, the heartbeat of every social justice movement in the world, right?
That's right.
The apartheid, the movement against apartheid in South Africa was driven by beautiful music. The civil rights movement by song, you know, by drumming, by this beauty of art and the creation of art. It's such a central part of us shaping and shifting and building a new cultural consciousness, right? And art and music is the bridge, and we have to meet the young people where they are. And where they are is in the songs, on the radio, on the TV.
They're there.
Where the young people live.
Exactly.
And this is how we create that culture of peace and compassion is by helping them tap into a voice.
Thank you. We are out of time. I wish I have like so many questions still, and there's so many questions in the chat. I wish we could stay here forever, but I want to be mindful of your three very busy, important people. So I want to be mindful of your time. Just thank you all again so much for just like helping hold this space with one another, for our audience. What came to me in this last sharing that your words, Aaron, impression without expression leads to depression. Right. You know, that art, letting the storytelling come through. So thank you all so much. I'll just ask the final question of what's something that's resonating for you in this conversation, some action or practice that our audience can take. Specifically, Harjeet asks, do you have resources that you can offer up or share with the audience? Ones around communities that have been marginalized, that are like to the specific communities discussed. It's a little vague, but maybe just some resources that you might want to share with the audience. Pumla, is there anything that's resonating for you in this last moment?
Yes, thank you so much. What resonates for me is really just a message about how we look at this idea of what is passed on, the transgenerationality of the trauma. And often the view is that this is passed on from the last generation into the next and into the next. But what is important for us to realize is that the current generation actually lives with this trauma in its disempowering reality. And while that is true, therein lies the possibility of repair, because we are extricating the future generations from this transgenerational trap. Once something is nameable, we can see it, we know what it is lived, it can be acknowledged on both sides so that you can work with it. Whereas if you think it's the past and people don't want to move on, you know, they must get over it, then there's a sense of forgetting that actually it is a current reality. And when we face it and know that it's not unnameable, it's here, people live with it as a lived memory of this past. And so in this sense, then, this violent history, as we recognize and acknowledge it, we can work with it because now we can see these are the consequences of the losses. And so for those people who come from the other side, having benefited, the acknowledgement, empathy, connecting empathically with this reality allows this past, lays bare this history so that you can work with it. It can be confronted, acknowledged, and therein lies the possibility that it can be, the process of repair can be realized.
Erin, reflections, closing thoughts?
Well, I learned by going where I have to go. So listen to where we're being guided, be vulnerable, courageous, and step into it, and learn and transform. We can do this. It just takes time, space, commitment.
Hawah?
Absolutely, we can do this. I really believe we can do this. I also know that part of what this is going to require is for certain groups of people to lead. And when I say that, I mean, as I've been here at Lake Atetlan, I've had numerous conversations with white identifying people about how buying land is like continuing to remove and push the Mayans out of the lake. And as I try to engage in these conversations, I had one person recommend, hey, why don't you do a training or a workshop here on what this means, and the impact on us and on the community. And what I felt was, and I shared this with the individual, I think racism will need to be dismantled and led by those who've been benefiting from racism. To have and to continue to try and have people of color lead that movement, it's really like setting up the entire opportunity for failure, right? It needs to be led and driven by those who benefit from the system. And in a similar way, I talk about patriarchy, right? We cannot expect female identifying or women to be leading a movement to transmute and to dismantle patriarchy. That is the responsibility of male identifying people, of men on this earth. We are the ones that need to be holding those circles and creating those spaces. We can't expect women to do that. We can't expect people of color to do that. And so I guess like the practical takeaway is one that continues to prod us post George Floyd era and the racial reckoning that has become very much a part of the mainstream. Some ways the mainstream conversation is like, please, like, don't allow yourself to get comfortable, right? Like I notice we're starting to like get comfortable again, and I think these hard conversations have to keep happening, and I hope we can keep calling each other in. That's the other takeaway and the action step I have for all of us. How do we do this work and call everyone into the work, and transcend the polarization and instead engage in conversation, real dialogue, and get involved in your school systems, get involved in the curriculum, get involved in changing that, get like practically involved, and use the lessons you've learned from Pumla and Erin today to support you in creating spaces in education for healing and repair, so we can really find a new way forward.
Thank you, all of you, once more.
Thank you so great.
Yeah, I'll just close with some closing reflections and sharings on what's coming up for me and what I learned from each of you. I often think people are looking for immediate answers or examples to solve these issues. But, like Hawah just said, so much of this work is about building in the habits, the muscle memory to seek out the examples for yourself, to actually question what you think you know around racial, environmental, social reconciliation, to be curious, to reimagine. And like Aaron said, we can do this. And something that was coming up for me as I watched this documentary, Dreamland, on HBO. It's about the 1920s Tulsa, Oklahoma destruction of Black Wall Street. And there's a quote in it that says, another part of the trauma is the silence.
Yeah.
And I hope that this conversation just opened up the possibilities for you all to find your voice and to continue to seek out the spaces that support your story and your truth to be shared. Aaron shared with us the incredible positive work that the Academy for Love of Learning is doing to share pedagogies that make it possible for deeper levels of love to manifest in the world. He reminded us of how today's young people are working to bridge divides and plant the seeds for a different future. Pumla shared that we are born to love, and if we open up the space, there is always the potential that things will change. This is the work of repair and creating space for the emergence of the unexpected. Hawah shared how we need to move from inclusion to a sense of belonging. Having a sense of belonging, he said, is knowing that your story counts for something. Through his work, he empowers youth to reflect on their journeys, to share their stories, and nurture hope for our future. Thank you all for this generative conversation in the powerful subject of repair and what makes deep healing possible. So before we close and move into a brief guided meditation with Hawah, just some quick announcements of some upcoming programs with Mind and Life. We encourage you to check out our new online course, The Mind, the Human Earth Connection in the Climate Crisis. You can learn more about this course through our website. And we're going to be launching our 4th season of the Mind and Life podcast this Friday, February 25th, led by our incredible host, Wendy Hassenkamp. And you can learn more and sign up for the updates through the Mind and Life website. And again, thank you for joining us. As always, deep bows of appreciation to our Mind and Life team that's working behind the scenes. And I'd love to extend my heartfelt appreciations once more to these amazing speakers, the generous donors, the engaged audience members who have contributed to the success of this season's Inspiring Minds. We hope that you all stay connected with us through our programs in the coming year. We couldn't do this without you, and your support is greatly needed. So thank you. I'm going to hand it over to you, Hawah. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Aaron. Oh, Pumla. I was just like the shivers, like Hawah said. Thank you. So.
Yeah, and thank you, Shankari, for always curating the most incredible dialogues and bringing the most incredible people together. And thank you, Mind Life Institute, for having me and trusting all of us here with this important space. I invite everyone to sit where you are, in your chair. If you're on a couch, you can lay down if you'd like. Make yourself comfortable in this moment. Make yourself soft and maybe a little vulnerable. Allow yourself to sink into your seat. We opened with a meditation, and we'll seal this dialogue and conversation with a meditation. Coming back to our breath and feeling where in the body the breath is naturally traveling to. I invite you to elongate the breath. And I invite you to pause momentarily between your inhale and your exhale. And notice the space between the pause. And feel yourself connecting into to your heart space. This conversation requires vulnerability, and it requires us to be tapped in and tuned in to compassion and listening. So as you become more at ease with your breath, I invite you to begin to relax the breath now, coming back to a natural rhythm, just your organic, natural breathing. And move your attention, move your awareness into your heart. Maybe you can feel your heart beating inside your chest. And I invite you to even bring your hand or your hands up and place your palms over the heart and over the chest so that you can really connect into the pulsing. And if you can hear the heart beating without moving your hands, and just stay where you are if that's comfortable. And do the next few moments here of just silence, and I invite you to really listen and just feel the natural rhythm of your heart and what comes up for you. And holding on to that heartbeat, holding on to the sound. I invite you now to come into 3 collective breaths that we'll do together. Exhale all the air out through the nose. Keep your lips joined gently together. Let's take a deep breath in through the nose, into the heart. You're breathing into the heart now. And exhale, and keep softening. Breathe the air in and send it right into your heart. See if you can still feel the pulsing. Exhale, let it go. Let it go. Final deep breath in. And let's pause for just a few seconds. Hold the breath. And exhale. And come back to normal breathing, breathing naturally. You can stay here for as long as you'd like. If you're feeling that deep sense of stillness and space, please just keep meditating here and sit with yourself and with the breath, with the sounds. I also invite you now, if you're ready to close, I invite you to slowly open your eyes. And I'm going to light a candle for all beings. And this candle will keep burning through the end of the night until it goes out. But may all beings be free from suffering. May all beings experience true peace, true compassion, and and love. Ashe, Aho, Ahankatu. Thank you. Good day. Good night.